As I promised in my last video, I am putting out this particular video to share a set of screenshots of a conversation I had with a particular member of the board of the Association of British Scrabble Players. That particular board member's name is Natalie Zolty, and this conversation happened on June 26th, 2023. But before I get into those screenshots in particular, which will be linked in the description, I want to give a sense of the particular timeline of events and where this lies and all of this, because I think this is actually a very important moment in the scheme of all these things. In a lot of ways, the time at which Natalie and I had this conversation was kind of the high watermark for me in terms of me actually being in a good emotional place despite all of the abuse happening around me and not having gotten angry and nasty to these people yet, even in the face of many abuses that had happened to me. And a big part of the reason why that is that I was, from my point of view, successfully actually challenging this stuff in court and had some hope of a positive resolution to this, as well as positive resolutions in terms of how ABSP was trying to represent me with WESPA and NASPA interfering. And it was kind of only very shortly after this that things really turned south in terms of my results with both the organizations and the legal world that really derailed me mentally. So what I'm going to do is give a timeline in the description of this video of a whole bunch of the events that were sort of around and leading up to this particular thing. And a lot of this, the relevant documents are in the particular blog post called The Conspiracy, and a lot of the dates you'll see match up with things mentioned there, and you can see the relevant documents there. I won't go and link all of the documents that are in The Conspiracy here in the description, but there are a few pieces that are not documented there, but are documented in other places on the blog or in other documents that I've put online. So I have put in a few links as supplementary things that show these things happened on these particular dates and times when they were not featured in that particular blog post, The Conspiracy, just to sort of sort out the timeline to make that clearer. I also want to explain from the outset that Natalie Zolty is a person that I really, really like on a personal level. She's someone I've gotten to know decently well in a number of the trips I've made to the UK over the last several years before I was banned from playing in Scrabble. And someone who is, although she's a little bit older than I am, I think she got into tournament Scrabble a little bit later than I did, and sort of started climbing up the expert ranks at a time after me. But as somebody who I recognize has worked hard at the game and become significantly better at it over the last few years. And I'm very pleased to see her progress, and I respect her game a lot. I think she's done a great job learning the game, being a student of the game, and doing what she can to promote the game. And in fact, one of the things that she did to help promote the game after she and I had some friendly interactions at some UK Scrabble tournaments is when the Scrabble Go app came out, I think it was. She actually ran a community game where it was her and all of the community of people commenting on a particular social media post were actually making the moves against me. And I was the expert they were playing against. So she was actually putting me in that featured position of everybody, collaborate to play against an expert. So she was someone who held me up as an example of an expert player in the Scrabble community whose play we should celebrate and analyze and look at, and someone who I thought I had a very positive relationship with for a long time. And at the time that she and I had this conversation, things I think were still very positive between us. I do think that part of what happened, and I've explained a little bit before, I'll explain a little bit more here, is that it was shortly after this point when I began to get very frustrated and upset with the ways in which not only Scrabble leadership was not helping me, was hurting me, but the way in which a lot of people were not having any backbone and standing up to the bullies that really upset me. And it was actually a little while after this that I made a particularly unkind comment to Wayne Kelly on social media in which I used the word milquetoast. And I know that that particular word, which at the time was the only unkind word I had said to Wayne Kelly, upset Natalie, and is the reason why she was, or at least one of the reasons why she was less willing to let me go forward with making her words public at a later date. And I want to tell you, she and I, told you, did have this conversation about these particular screenshots and about the possibility of me sharing it. And at this later point, after I had shot my mouth off toward Wayne Kelly, she was not in favor of me sharing these screenshots anymore. And at the same time, I tried to respect her in obeying that wish not to share what she has said. So I am, in making this video and showing these screenshots, actually going back on what I did before and making the screenshots public against her will. And I'm admitting that fully, but I also want to be clear, Natalie, that I'm not doing this out of hard feelings toward you, and I'm not doing it with any anger. I really hope that I'm going to talk a lot about some of the things that made me angry and why I was so angry and upset in this video, but I'm hopeful that I can actually deliver it in a way that is not angry at all right now, because that's not how I'm feeling. I'm just feeling that I have a need to clear the air and to just put the truth out there to testify for itself, so people can understand that my anger was justified. So the full timeline of these events, as I said, will be in the description of this video, but I'm just going to go over a little bit of the outline of that for now, just to sort of set the stage for this particular conversation. So if you'll remember, it was late 2022, specifically September 23rd, 2022, that NASPA first suspended me for 3 years, citing these mysterious 3 violations of the code of conduct that I made, even though they didn't say what those 3 violations were. It wasn't until 2 months after that, in November of 2022, that I got a lawyer to actually write to John Chu and NASPA and say, okay, tell us what those 3 violations were. And John Chu literally refused to answer, refused to give any rationale for the reason I was suspended. And it was actually just a few days after that refusal that I even found out in mid-November that NASPA had gotten an extra set of documents from my accusers in early September before the hearing about me happened, that they'd hidden from me. They never let me see the second round of documents and had made this decision to suspend me on asymmetric information, with me not being able to see everything I was accused of and even respond to it. So I spent a while after that, in late 2022 up to early 2023, hiring lawyers, building up a legal case, and deciding to take the Clinchies to court. And I did want to appeal a decision of that to NASPA, but I took some time on doing that because I was also balancing that with all the legal stuff. And it wasn't until, I think, Memorial Day weekend, May 26th, 2023, so we're talking nearly a half year later after the suspension, that I sent, after the suspension began, that I emailed NASPA an appeal of my suspension, in which I finally responded to this second round of documents that I hadn't been able to answer the first time, and also talked about NASPA's own wrongdoing in hiding those documents, how this was clearly not a fair trial. And in response to that, the last I heard from John Chu was at the time on June 4th, 2023. So keep in mind, suspended me on September 23rd, 2022, and then responded to the appeal on June 4th, 2023, refusing to give a date that they were going to handle the appeal by, and then literally ghosting me for more than 2 months after that. So NASPA had no desire to respond to my appeal, probably never would have given any response whatsoever. Why? Because they knew they were guilty shits and had done bad things and hiding documents from me, and I was now calling them out for all their wrongdoing, and there was no way they could even answer without admitting that they were shitheads or without lying further. So at this point, I decided I had to start escalating with the Association of British Scrabble Players and the World English Language Scrabble Players Association, which hadn't really been involved yet. And that's why it was just a few days after John Chu's refusal, June 8th, that I gave this whole set of documents, all of the communications I had with NASPA, all the things my accusers had said, all the things I had written in response, and handed it all over to Wayne Kelly, who was president of the Association of British Scrabble Players, and Mina, who at that time was still on the WESPA board. And they passed it along to those particular boards. And it was just a few days after that that I had a private conversation with Wayne Kelly, which was later followed up on by official communications from Chris Harrison of ABSP, basically telling me that ABSP was on my side, that they recognized I was treated wrongly, and they were going to stand up for me to play. But keep in mind, at the time that all of this happened, the only things on my blog still were the original 2 blog posts from July 2020, before I ever got banned from Scrabble. Any of this stuff happened. It was actually kind of concurrently with this stuff happening in mid-June that I made the next post, the Scapegoat, on my blog. That was June 15th. But keep in mind, that one was only a quick summary of what the wrongdoing was against me, and an announcement that I was taking these people to court. And I didn't actually include any of the documents to back all of it up in that. And in fact, that statement was vetted by my lawyer at the time as just a synopsis of where things are at, to sort of inform the overall Scrabble population about the ways in which the Scrabble organizations themselves were doing wrongdoing and making me look like the bad guy here, and just, putting a spanner in the works to stop justice from happening. And it's going to be the case, you'll see, that when Natalie and I had this conversation, these were still the only things up on the blog. The only things at all that were on the blog were those first 2 posts from July 2020 and this one sort of synopsis, the Scapegoat, which was also the first time I admitted publicly, I told the public about the fact that NASPA was hiding documents from me, and that I knew that they had been hiding documents from me. So it was under that situation that I talked to Natalie Zolty. But I also want to be clear, even though I had not yet published this blog post called The Conspiracy that gives this full timeline and all these documents of recorded history to the world, this is after the point in early June that I already shared basically everything that is in that conspiracy document with the entirety of not just the NASPA board, but also the WESPA board and ABSP board, which Natalie Zolty was on. So even though it wasn't on the blog yet, Natalie Zolty had time to look over all those documents, and I think she did look over a fair amount of it going into this conversation that she and I had online. And the ABSP had already been dealing with that, and dealing with WESPA behind the scenes and dealing with that. And I also want to be clear here that I didn't approach Natalie Zolty. She approached me. It was maybe after I made some Facebook posts or said something, whatever, that she actually started this one-on-one conversation with me over Facebook Messenger, and really called out to me privately a lot of the wrong things about how I was being treated. But I also want to be clear, this was coming at a time when I was actually pretty optimistic I was going to get a good result from this court case. Because for one thing, June 23rd, 2023 is the date that Natalie and I talked, but it was actually the day before that, June 22nd, was the date that Lola's lawyer's letter was dated, that was sent to my lawyer, actually asking for a settlement, and in particular saying, and this is from my own lawyer's description of that letter, she's also indicated that she's open to other non-monetary demands, which my then lawyer saw as an opening to craft a statement that she can sign walking back her comments. Now, I believe, even though my lawyer had received that letter the day before my conversation with Natalie, he didn't actually pass me an email and inform me about it until a couple days after this conversation with Natalie, so I wasn't actually aware of it necessarily yet at the time that I talked to Natalie. But I'm telling you that it was in this same time period when it actually seemed like my court case was going along well, and that Lola was going to possibly settle out of court, which actually would have increased the chance of the Clinchies being in trouble and being held accountable for what they did, in my opinion. But it was really only in the week or so after this conversation with Natalie, at the end of June going into July, when everything started to fall apart. So for one thing, it was a few days before I talked to Natalie that I had gotten the first email from Chris Harrison of ABSP, which had basically been the official statement to back up the informal thing that Wayne Kelly had said to me. And it basically said that they were advocating for me to be able to play. And there was no real kowtowing to WESPA yet. But it was actually just shortly after Natalie and I spoke on July 1st, 2023, that I got a second letter from Chris Harrison of ABSP. in which they basically backed down and said that ABSP had acquiesced to letting WESPA refuse to let me play in tournaments that were rated by both WESPA and ABSP. So I want to be clear about that. The current status of things in terms of how things ended up with ABSP, and it's never changed as far as I know, is that ABSP was fine with me playing tournaments in their country that were not rated by WESPA, but the only thing I was banned from playing in was the tournaments that were rated by WESPA. Now, on the surface, you might say, well, that's a recognition that they don't think you did anything wrong, only WESPA did. But at the same time, from a practical point of view, that's almost as good as a full ban, because almost any major tournament that someone's going to want to travel overseas for in the UK is going to also be rated by WESPA. And the only things that would only be rated by ABSP were small one-day tournaments, which weren't generally going to be something that was really worth me flying across an ocean to play in. So even though it wasn't a full ban, it was sort of de facto an almost full ban in terms of not giving me any real practical reason to go over to UK and play in a tournament. And it was ridiculous because WESPA was behaving unethically and making clear that they didn't have any real grounds for doing anything, but they were just still trying to stand in my way and tacitly support the mistreatment I'd gotten from NASPA and the other organizations. But anyway, that was early July, and it was very, very shortly after that whole fiasco with Terry Kang sending this angry letter to the Clinchies happened, and then the Clinchies lawyer twisting it into intimidating my lawyer into threatening to drop my case for completely false reasons, as if I had committed witness tampering, which was an absurdly untrue thing. And then it didn't result in my lawyer quitting the case right away, but he threatened to quit the case, and I ended up firing him 2 weeks later and having to represent myself pro se. And then it was actually in the following month, in August of 2023, that my case was thrown out of court in a way that resulted in me getting stuck with attorney fees. And then only after that happened, in August of 2023, so, in September of 2023, a month after my case had been thrown out in August, and almost 1 full year after NASPA's original suspension, did NASPA finally respond to my appeal and actually give a rationale, not just for the appeal, but for apparently what purportedly was the reason why they suspended me in the first place. So they never explained that suspension for the entire year of that suspension, and only now that their arms are being twisted were they actually explaining it. And as I've explained in some other videos, I believe what NASPA wrote in September 2023 actually did constitute defamation. It is where it rose from the point of they're not just being persuaded by the defamation of other people, but they are actually now actively participating in the defamation of me. And why did they do it? Well, maybe part of the reason is because I already lost the court case. And they could just say, oh, well, we believe the court case, that kind of thing. It emboldened them to just hop on board with the people who had won the court case, even though those people were just immoral and disgusting and done terrible things. And NASPA didn't necessarily have an eye into how terrible those things were yet, because I had not yet actually made the post on my blog revealing what a travesty of justice, how mishandled this court case was, and how there were actually going to be cases for ethics complaints against the lawyers in this case. And by the way, the ethics case against my lawyer, my former lawyer, Mark Mohan, is still proceeding, and it is looking like it is quite possible that he might actually get in some trouble for all of this. So that is serious, the way the lawyers really wronged me in this whole story here. So that's the basic timeline of things, but I'm not going to go over the whole detail of the conversation with Natalie, but the screenshots are there. I do ask that you take the time to read over the whole thing. But what really gets me about it is she just said what to me are really obvious things that anyone should have picked up from this situation about how clearly the Scrabble associations were overstepping, and that how absurd it was that NASPA was banning me and literally refusing to give a rationale for when this was. So keep in mind, right, they suspended me in September 2022. They didn't even try to give this rationale until September 2023. And I'm talking to her in June 2023. So this is not quite a full year later, but nearly a full year later, during that long 10-month period where NASPA has literally stood in my way and say, we are not letting Dave play, we are giving no rationale for why that is. And even after WESPA had said, what's the rationale? And they said, we won't tell you either. And then WESPA said, you know what? Even though they didn't tell us the rationale, we're still going to bully ABSP into not letting Dave play. And Natalie makes clear in this whole thing that ABSP wants me to play, that my record is unblemished in their country, and she basically says that the entire ABSP board feels the same way, but she's afraid to speak up. She doesn't want this stuff becoming public, and she said if she did speak up, it would have to be in a way that made clear it was just a personal statement from her and not an official statement of her as an ABSP board member. Now, why the heck would that be? Well, the exact reason why is because we have an immoral group of people running the show in NASPA and in WESPA who are being bullies to people in other organizations who are convincing them to keep me out, even though everyone can see that their process is ridiculous and they're behaving in really scummy ways. And this is the thing. Anybody who sees this, what Natalie said, her reactions should have been freaking obvious to you if you were an honest and good person. And the fact that people like Ellie Dangor and later Geigensaler had negative reactions to me, it was all because of ways in which I showed I was so angry. I responded in nasty ways months after this point. Long after this point. And even to the point where I was having this conversation with Natalie, I was still behaving perfectly. I was behaving perfectly in the courtroom. I was behaving perfectly in my interactions with Scrabble players. I was keeping it close to the vest. I wasn't saying that much stuff publicly on the blog yet because of the fact that there was an ongoing court case happening here. But I was behaving like an absolute total gentleman this whole time. And the fact is that I'm outraged, or I was outraged, because not enough other people were outraged on my behalf. And they let all this abuse happen. They let the bullies win. They went along with it. They got bullied. They allowed me to get bullied worse. And then they were upset that months later, when this abuse had already been happening to me for years, I got so angry and showed so much anger. And that's a big part of it, is that you didn't have vision into how long this abuse had lasted to me, how long I'd been being defamed, how long I'd been being mistreated, how long I'd been being bullied, and what a massive emotional effect it had on me. And in fact, you know what's a funny thing? At the point when I had this conversation with Natalie, I had still been really nice to the people in the Scrabble community. I had still been really nice to the people who were making these accusations against me and carrying this whole campaign against me. The only people I'd really been showing my anger to were people outside of the Scrabble world, my friends and family, were the people I was confiding in about what was going on. I knew that no matter how angry or upset I was, I had to stay on such perfect behavior around them so they wouldn't judge me and get angry and be scared of me, and I had to seem calm and rational to them. But there was still so much anger and upset at this that's what tore my whole situation with my family apart. Really, in 2019 up to early 2022, my whole situation with my family completely deteriorated because they saw me as an angry, yelling mess. Why? Because I was trying to speak up to get help, to get people to understand the abuse I was going through, to understand how horribly and morally not only the Clinchies and their friends, but also now these Scrabble associations were behaving toward me. And I couldn't get anyone to believe or care. And I just got people being scared of me being angry in response to all this, rather than actually angry on my behalf about what happened to me. And I want to be clear too, I held back in so many ways. I was a gentleman in so many ways. And I also want to share one more piece of text. If you read The Obstructionists, it goes into a lot of detail about the particular ways that WESPA board became involved in this wrongdoing, which a lot of this was around the time I was talking to Natalie, or right after I talked to Natalie there. And that particular post ends with a screenshot of a conversation I had with Wayne Kelly, in which Wayne really made it clear some of the ways in which the people on the WESPA board were bullying him, and he was intimidated. And that is part of what just kind of grosses me out in this whole thing. Because the fact is that from Wayne's point of view, part of the view here was that if the ABSP stood up for me, there was a threat from WESPA potentially that ABSP would not be recognized anymore fully, or that all of their tournaments would not be rated. Now, to be clear, I don't know whether they said that to him exactly or just put that fear in his head, but the point is that that was his point of view. That was what things looked like from his point of view, and that's made clear by that screenshot. And that tells me that people did intimidate him, people did try to scare him and all that. But also, I want to say that, you know, even though I was like a bit disappointed and upset with Wayne and called him a milquetoast a little bit after that happened, I didn't say meaner things to him until much, much later than this. I still managed to mostly hold my tongue when it came to Wayne, because he had been one of the people who was more on my side and was more trying to advocate for me. But I will also tell you truthfully, Wayne, and again, I'm saying this not in anger at this particular moment, you are the person I might have gotten actually the most angry and upset and disappointed in this entire story. I find your cowardice and your ability to be bullied here just so loathsome. And it really comes down to, you wronged me in a lot of ways the same as my mother did. Is you let the bullies win, you normalized this behavior because you didn't do what a normal human being should do in just standing up to this situation. ABSP has been around a lot longer than WESPA has. It has more cachet, the ratings have more historical cachet, and it is completely absurd for WESPA to try to interfere with ABSP the way they did. And furthermore, it was an unrealistic threat. If you would actually just let me play in all the ABSP tournaments, say play in one that was WESPA rated and then submitted the ratings to WESPA, and WESPA had refused to rate it, all that would have happened is that ABSP would look like the people who were standing up and doing the right thing, who were being just reasonable people, and that WESPA was being a bunch of bullying shitbags. It would have been obvious that they are behaving in very unprofessional ways, that they are trying to intimidate, trying to threat, and they're just making their WESPA ratings, which already don't mean very much, already don't have a lot of cachet, actually worth even less. And they couldn't have cut ABSP out of WESPA without making WESPA a meaningless organization and just putting the Scrabble world into chaos. ABSP has been running tournaments from the early 1970s. I talked about that in my history video. You are the original National Scrabble Association. You started out with the first ever Scrabble tournaments. And you should have recognized your power to actually have more influence in the situation and done what was right rather than kowtowing to these bullies. And I'm upset at you for the exact same reason I'm upset with my mom. You know, my mom was intimidated. She was an abused person in her household too. I absolutely understand that. At the same time, there's a lot of ways that I'm a lot more angry at my mother than I am at the abusive boyfriend who was in the house. Why? Because he didn't owe me anything. Because he wasn't part of my family. He wasn't a friend of mine. Yeah, he was a complete asshole. Yes, he was mean to children. Yes, he tore down the self-esteem of a young child in a way that makes him a very fucking small man. But as much as that's horrible behavior, he still had the right to do all of that. He's allowed to be as nasty and mean a person as he wants. And the fact is that my mom invited him into her home, and she let him stay there, and she tolerated that behavior from him and even let him continue to stay there and be with her family while he was behaving like that. She gave that approval. And that's the thing, is that my mom was the one who was my flesh and blood. My mom was the one whose responsibility was the safety of her children and the safety of her home. And she was the one who had the responsibility to stand the fuck up, not let this abuser get away with this shit and throw him out of the house. And quite simply, you were in charge of ABSP Scrabble. You were in charge of the oldest National Scrabble Association, which has more cachet than WESPA does. And you were the one who was responsible for protecting the sanctity of Scrabble in the UK by standing up and saying, we will not let this disgustingly corrupt WESPA board do the shitty things that they're doing with their disgustingly corrupt WESPA president, Chris Lipe, at that time. And I held back from saying a lot of this stuff publicly in order to try to be more diplomatic, in order to hold my tongue. And I will tell you that everything I'm going to read to you now is stuff that I did say much later on in this argument. But I want to be clear, this is something that I actually wrote in a Facebook message to Wayne Kelly on January 8th, 2024. So if you look at that screenshot, it's just a few messages that Wayne Kelly and I sent to each other right at the end of The Obstructionists. I literally cut that off mid-conversation, and there was one more comment I made on that Facebook conversation immediately after that is other stuff that I didn't voice publicly until much, much later. But I'm going to share it with you now just to show you that I have been completely consistent. I have been saying the exact same story about the wrongdoing of WESPA and about the wrongdoing of Chris Lipe the entire time. I never had to change my tune because the truth indicts them. So again, this will be in the description of the video, but I'm going to read you exactly what I wrote to Wayne Kelly immediately after that screenshot ended. Implicit in John Chu's rationalization of NASA's suspension of me is that nothing Jennifer said about me is believable. Forgetting about Lola and just focusing on the Jennifer story, literally the only thing Chu said I was, quote, guilty, unquote, of was the communications I sent to her prior to the 2017 New Orleans tournament, all of which I'd already admitted to in July 2020. That means that NASPA is not even contesting that everything Jennifer said about my supposed behavior after that and everything she said about my behavior in a relationship before that is not credible. She lied in disgusting and damaging ways about me over and over and over again, and NASPA and everyone else in Scrabble leadership has just lied over that and ignored it. It's absurd. I did nothing wrong, and these people made a massive false and premeditated attack on me when I've had no contact with them for nearly 6 years now. Any rational outsider would say that they abused, attacked, and harassed me. But the Scrabble leadership is pretending the exact opposite and making me the bad guy when I am the victim of disgusting behavior. I appreciate that you're in a delicate position, but if you're dealing with people who want to perpetuate lies and blame and punish the victim, you're dealing with terrible people and a community that is rotten to its moral core.